Hello and welcome to the live stream. A little bit of a different live stream today, I hope, I think. Anyway, welcome from wherever you are in the world, watching this, taking part, hopefully, with YouTube chat, whatever time zone you're in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And if you're watching this retrospectively, thanks for joining us as well. Yes, as I say, a little bit of a different one, partly because this is the August break, and I thought I would just go down a slightly different route to normal. Also because over the years, over the last 2 or 3 years, during the live streams, there've been quite a lot of requests, questions, comments about could I possibly go into a little bit more detail about what we loosely call short corners and how some drivers manage to pull this off and others don't. And I've always said, yeah, good idea. Let me get on with that. So here I am trying to get on with it. So bear with me. It won't be a masterclass in terms of technology and animation, but hopefully it'll give a little bit more depth to what we talk about on a pretty regular basis on this channel, which is why some drivers do some things in corners and others don't. I should have a rider here, and that is that all of the Grand Prix drivers out there are very, very good. And all of them have unbelievable reflexes, balance, timing, rhythm, peripheral vision, all the things you need to be a racing driver. I wouldn't include bravery in there because as I think we will see today, and as I've pointed out many times, if you're having to rely on bravery to be quick, you shouldn't be in a racing car. It's all about manipulation of the car. To some extent, it's about anticipation, but it's also about management of the car on an absolutely perfect level with inputs. And when you're doing that and you're in that zone and you're feeling the surface of the road, everything is happening as one. So nothing should catch you by surprise in a racing car. But of course things do, because all racing drivers are human beings. And that's why we see Max Verstappen going off. That's why we see Kimi Antonelli making mistakes. That's why we see Charles Leclerc making many mistakes. And so it goes on, and Lewis Hamilton as well, of course. But there is a pattern that is obvious between the drivers, of some drivers' styles being different from another's. And that's what we wanted to talk about today. And I know I've had a look through some of the questions in the chat. A lot of them are based on, oh, there's Peter Windsor doing a live stream. We'll just ask lots of new questions again. That's fine, and I will get onto those later on. But I wanted to try and focus on this business, because if I don't focus my mind on it, I'll never get it done. A, and B, it requires a little bit of concentration anyway on my part, and I'm slightly nervous because I'm going to be doing some freehand drawing sketches, and that's always a bit of a drama, isn't it, when you're doing it live? So anyway, I've said, I think, most of what I want to say before we get down to the drawings, other than to add that this is not about racing lines. Of course, lines are the icing on the cake, and what an overhead camera, a drone or whatever can see comparing two different lines between two drivers on a corner is significant. But the real question in all of this is why some drivers can do what we're about to show you and why others cannot. And that is all to do with rates of input. That's all to do with the way they're initiating the steering, the way they're initiating the brakes, the way they apply the brakes, the way they come out of the brakes, the rate at which they come out of the brakes, and the linear smoothness thereof, if that's the right phraseology. And the same applies to the throttle as well. It's all to do with how you manage the weights. It's all to do with subtle movements in the car. And some drivers will say, yeah, I'm turning in on the brakes here, but they're not really turning in on the brakes. What they're actually doing is slowing the car down on the brakes and not going through at the speed that another driver would. So it's all to do with inputs. And line, if it was as easy as line, everyone would be doing it, quite obviously. So that's obviously what I wanted to say at the start. Okay, right. With no more ado, let's have a look. That's a two shot now, and you can see that's my hand waving. And that is ostensibly turn 14 in Hungary, which is as good a place as any, really, to start, I think, well, to focus on today, because it's preceded by, obviously, turn 13, which is a left-hander, and followed pretty soon by 14. So there's not a lot of room to get the car ready for 14. You've got to begin 14 really in the middle of 13 and what you're doing there, and what sort of exit you're getting out of 13. And that predetermines really a lot of the load that you're going to be then taking into 14 at the change of direction level. And then the other point about 14 is that it is a corner that precedes the longest usable straight in Hungary. There are others, obviously, the back of the circuit, there's one, but it's not as long as this. And so the pit straight is significant. And having a good, clean exit out of here is very, very important. And you saw during the race, so many drivers sitting on understeer mid-corner in 14, just waiting for the car to bite so they could get on the power. And the track got, picked up grip, and then it went away, and then picked up grip, and then somebody would go off, and then there'd be marbles online. There was so many variables. Anyway, let's see what we can do here. I'm going to start with, I've got two pens, blue and red, and I think we'll call the blue the sort of traditional classic racing line. Line, I shouldn't be using the word line, should I? It's the way that most of the drivers on the grid take turn 14 and took 14 over the Grand Prix. I think the best example of that is probably Carlos Sainz, because he's got a lot of refinement now in terms of the way he creates a corner, but is still very much on the long corner side and the wide turn inside. And there are many others almost there, but not, I wouldn't have said right at Carlos's level. Liam Lawson would be another obvious example. Franco Colapinto had that shunt here. He's another that drives the same way as Carlos, but not with the same finesse yet, but he may well find it. And then and we'll talk later on about whether George Russell's and the Lando Norrises fit in with this, and the Daniel Ricciardo's probably as well would be another good example. But this is the sort of classic Carlos Sainz thing, and I'm going to have to try to move the mic so I can stay absolutely sharp with the audio. That's the general plan. But Carlos comes out of 13, and he's got quite a lot of load because he does drive on the rear of the car, and he likes to feel the rear. And so he'll be coming out of 13 here. And then almost immediately, I'm not saying this would be his train of thought, but this is what is built inside him, having done so many laps of Hungary and knowing what is coming next. You feel, okay, 14, I know what 14 is all about. What 14 is all about is, and I'll just show you here, that is the geometrical apex of 14. And that's if you extend the two straights and then bisect the angle, that is the geometrical apex. Carlos Sainz is thinking about wanting to get to the geometrical apex as quickly, with as much speed in the car as he can possibly have, on the basis that the more speed he carries there, the better his exit's going to be, and the better he's going to have down the straight, more speed he's going to have down the straight. So at this point here, where he's already coming out of 13 and he's preparing for 14, he's thinking, oh yeah, late apex, geometrical apex, I don't want to get in too early here. I've got to make sure I get the car wide and get on the power when I want to. So then he goes right across here, and he's thinking, right, I really want a wide approach to this, because it's a, if anything, I want a later apex than the geometrical apex. So he's about here. And then he's coming down approximately to the geometrical apex. And then he's getting on the power. He's doing really well. He's got a high minimum speed. He's on the power. He's sliding. And then he's coming out to about here. And then he's accelerating in a straight line down there. So that's basically what Carlos is doing. And that's what I would call a relatively long corner. So let's see now what Kimi Antonelli or Max Verstappen or Charles Leclerc. We'll leave Charles out of it a little bit because we know how he's had to adjust the way he drives because of the demands of the management and power management system on the Ferrari, which Lewis Hamilton has been exploiting so well. So he's had to start driving a little bit like Lewis, not as wide as Carlos Sainz, but he's had to compromise what he's doing, and he's doing a good job with that. But Max Verstappen and Kimi Antonelli, for two different reasons. Kimi, because he's got a very, very good car with a large sweet spot, and basically it can be driven, in my opinion, because it's got more efficient aero than any other car. They can do more to accommodate the setup of the two drivers. He can get in that car and he can drive it the way he wants to drive it. George is basically driving the way he wants to drive it, but he's actually not going as quickly as Kimi. We'll get on to that, an explanation for that. But with Max, it's a different thing. He is he wants to drive the way Max Verstappen drives. He doesn't really want to compromise his style in the way that Charles is having to compromise next to Lewis Hamilton. And he's the leader of the pack at Red Bull, quite obviously. And so Red Bull are accommodating the car to Max, and it's showing up one fault after another. It may be downshifts, it may be dampers, it may be inconsistent balance front to rear, it may be poor traction, it may be poor turning. All these things keep showing up because Max is wanting to get the best from the car the way he knows how to drive a racing car. And Red Bull are sort of 2 steps behind, trying to make sure the engine management system works for him. And it's obviously not an easy thing to do. And sometimes it all chimes in, sometimes it doesn't. Anyway, this is, let's have a look now at what Max is doing. Max comes out of 13 and already he's thinking, I don't want to use all the road out of 13 because I need to be extending this straight as long as possible. So he's not loading. So I'm not showing 13 here, but already he's done a transition and he's done a rotation in the middle of 13, which is giving him a straighter exit than Carlos Sainz, who's just looking for get on the power and load the car up as much as possible. So Max has got a straighter exit. Let's talk Max or Kimi here. It's either one of them. And he's here. And all Max and Kimi now are thinking of is not that apex and making sure that they get to it so they've got an exit from the corner. All they're thinking about here, deep down inside, not at that spur of the moment, is extending this straight for as long as they can. So they're going to go nowhere near Carlos in terms of approach to the corner. They're going to go about there. And then they're going to go in, and they know at some point now they're going to be in trouble, that they have to, sorry, this pen is running out. I knew that would happen. Good one, Windsor. They know at some point they're going to have to rotate the car, but they want to extend this straight. I say extend the straight. Obviously it's curved, and obviously it's slowing down here, whether it be coming out of the power a little bit, coming out of the power completely, whether it be braking coming out of the power, whether it be braking. But what it isn't is anything like as slow as what Carlos is having to do there, is rotating, effectively rotating the car there on entry. So they're extending this straight here down to about this point. And then they think, right, all bets are off. I've got to rotate this car. And then it won't be a specific geometric point that they'll be thinking of. It'll be, what does the car feel like? What is the understeer like? Have I got grip at the front? Have I got grip at the rear? What's the track surface like compared with the previous lap? How are we going? And they modulate the speed now with a brake coming out of the brake pedal pressure against increased steering load and nowhere near the throttle. From this section, it's a long section, relatively long, up to about here. That's what they're doing. They're just rotating the car, but they don't want to finish that rotation. This is a critical point until they've got to the feel of the moment when they can apply steering and get the car straight. And that is the key moment. The moment, the rotation only works if you're looking at the point of least possible downside actually to get the car straight again. And that's usually around here somewhere. So it's an early turn-in, but it's a relatively late rotation. And then having got that late rotation, the car's much straighter now than say the Carlos Sainz car, and they've got much less load in the car on acceleration, and they're coming out here. So effectively they've extended the straight here from about here down to about here. I don't know if that's visible. Yeah. And then they've extended the straight from about here to here. Now, the Carlos Sainz lap, absolutely no doubt at all that in this section, probably from about here, I'll do it in blue, here to here, this section here is quicker, quantifiably quicker than Max or Kimi would be doing there. That's the point of minimum speed in the corner. And so Carlos Sainz would be definitely higher minimum speed because his whole approach to the corner is based on being quick at that point. But when he comes out of the corner, because he hasn't actually rotated the car the way a Max or a Kimi rotates the car, he's still got much more load going through the left rear, going through the engine, going through the car as a whole at this point around here. Much more load in the car. And at that point, that's where they begin to intersect, and you'll see a Kimi or a Max or a Charles, if he's comfortable with the car, picking up speed. And by the time they get to here, absolutely for sure, the Kimi car's got less load in it and it's traveling quicker. And it'll be the same here. If you take any point here, the Max Kimi car will be traveling faster with less load in it than the Carlos Sainz car. And then on top of that, there's a little added bonus, which is if you added up the length of that blue line and compared it with the length of the red line, guess which is shorter, the red line. So that's it in essence. It is extending the straights, going into the corner and coming out of the corner, and extending it obviously by turning in relatively early. Now, there's one interesting point here, and that is, and what's driven me to be doing this, and that is that Kimi Antonelli was asked recently about his driving style. I think on motorsport.com, I can't remember. And if so, good. And he replied, it's like, I mentioned this before, it's I like to fold the handkerchief sort of thing, which to me is all fingertippy. And then he said, I turn in very late and very aggressively, I think is what he said, something like that. And of course, what he's talking about is this part of the corner. And he is turning in late there. He's turning in very late compared with Carlos Sainz. And it is quite aggressive because he needs to be able to do that with the steering to get the car rotated. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it needs to be a movement enough to energize the car to change direction. So that's what he means by aggressive. And that's all happening in this section here for Kimi Antonelli and for Max Verstappen. And so that's what he means. And of course, I think most people, when they saw that, thought, oh, Kimi turns in really late. That's the way he drives. Well, yeah, if you want to think that, then you'll be completely lost when you watch him on track, because it's not, of course, what he does. And that isn't, of course, what he meant. The other point here, I did talk about the icing on the cake being the length of the road that the drivers are using. Another point, of course, is that when Franco Colapinto lost it in turn 14, he lost it because at this point here, he's absolutely on the edge of, obviously on the limit of tire adhesion. He's over the limit of tire adhesion, but he's got slip angle, and he's driving on the rear axle because that's what he's doing. He's going in wide, and he's trying to get on the power as soon as possible, having braked as late as possible in this section here. And he's got all these different loads going on. And if he overdoes it by 1 millimeter or 1 pound of weight, the car's just going to spear off, which is exactly what it did, rear end first. It's exactly what happened. And the same thing happened with Lewis, except that Lewis did a really good job of catching it. And the back end he went down a gear and he just sort of held it and kept going. Very finessey catch by Lewis there. But when Max lost it there, he didn't lose the back and go off. He basically lost the front because he wanted the grip that wasn't there. He wanted the car to give him the grip that he felt was there, and all of a sudden it had just disappeared, evaporated in the way it does if a car's basically being overused, not overdriven, but the tires just can't take it anymore. And that's exactly what happened. But the interesting thing is that with Max, he went off on the front of the car. Yeah, there was a bit of a glitch like that, as he's trying to get the thing stopped. But basically it went off at the front, which meant that it was much less of a drama and he had much more room with which to play. I don't mean here runoff area room, although of course there is. What I mean is things that he can do in the cockpit to save the moment. And that's another great thing about the way he drives, because, and Kimi, you make the smallest mistake and you can adjust to it. And the body is adjusting to it absolutely perfectly, just complete and utter reflex actions. And that's what's happening. It's a, it's a very finessey, subtle thing with lots and lots of layers. And the next layer, of course, and I'm probably going to get a few questions about this, is how all that applies then to the dreaded subject of 2026 power unit management around the lap. And I've got to say, I don't really know. And to be honest, I don't really care, because all I care about is the end result. Because obviously with Max wanting to continue to do that, Red Bull are struggling. As I say, they're sort of in Max's slipstream, trying to make sure that what they can come up with matches what he wants to do with the car. In the case of Charles, they're basically saying, well, Lewis can make it work, so you've got to make it work, Charles. Change your style, change your brakes, whatever. And then in the case of Kimi, it's do your thing, Kimi, and George, do your thing. Now, I said I would talk about George and Lando and Oscar. I think, that they're a little bit all over the place based on how the car feels and what the tires are like. But one thing that is clear to me, and that is that Lando has the softest of touches, and it's soft probably as Max, but he doesn't use it to extend the straights very much. He doesn't go way out where Charles is, but he's got this sort of tendency to, sorry, I'll just get the thing up again. He's got this tendency to sort of be about here. And that's, but again, it's pretty much dependent on how the car feels, where it is with Max. That's the way he always drives, and he'll make the car do what he wants it to do. And I think Oscar's pretty much where, just inside Sainz. And George, I think, is inside both of them and not far away from Kimi. But one of the problems George has got is he's much spikier. Not much. He's considerably spikier with his inputs than Kimi Antonelli. And so when he's moving from, okay, I've extended the straight, now I want to rotate the car, everything is a bit more jolty and the car moves around a little bit more than it does with Kimi. I think that's one point. And secondly, I don't think George feels that the speed of the car necessarily is by extending the straight both ends. I think he thinks it's extending the straight coming out but not going in, and or whether he just doesn't feel comfortable doing that, and he's always driven with a little bit of load on the car just to get the feel on the rear of the car. And that's the different area for me, this area and turning. I think from here to here there's not a lot between George and Kimi. Obviously that's a very general statement based on most types of corners, but I would say it's all in this area here between George and Kimi. And George isn't that far away, but he's definitely not able to feel where the rotation point is as readily as George does. Probably because George hasn't been doing it for that long. He's been just looking at there's the apex, I'm going to be a little bit before it, a little bit afterwards. He thinks that way. He doesn't think of it as a rotation point. And I think that's another important point to make. I don't think, say, a Carlos Sainz or a Colapinto thinks of that geometric apex, which is the sort of center of their life. I don't think they think of that as the rotation point. They think about it as the apex that's sort of there to show them the line of the corner sort of thing. Whereas a Kimi or a Max, they don't think about a specific point. They just think about the rotation area. And that's why, famously, once when Rob Wilson was talking to Adrian Newey about Kimi Räikkönen and how he is so good at finding the perfect moment to rotate the car. Kimi was a great short corner driver, extending the straights in and out, very soft inputs, just phenomenally quick. And Adrian said, yeah, I get that. And then he watched him on TV on board with the next race, and then saw Rob later on, a week or so later, and said, I was a bit amazed that Kimi seems very inconsistent though, because his rotation point where he's moving the wheel at that point, that specific moment, was very different from lap to lap. He was never the same. It's very inconsistent. And Rob said, no, that's the absolute epitome of the art, because it isn't the same place, because nothing is ever the same in a racing car. The way you apply the brakes initially is always slightly different lap to lap. The temperature of the surface of the road, the temperature of the surface of the rubber, the brake pedal pressure, the fluid, the temperature of the brakes, and so on. Everything is different. Everything changes all the time. And so Kimi is constantly feeling, or was constantly feeling, that moment of the perfect, least possible downside moment to rotate the car, and not complicating it with, oh, I've got to turn in here, it's point A, point B, point C, geometrical apex, all that stuff. No way. And it's just all fluid and natural. And Adrian said, oh, wow, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Amazing, isn't it? And this kind of sums up everything I've learnt. You may say, why is Windsor to be believed in any of this stuff? Well, the reason I talk about it is because I've always been interested in this and why one driver looks different from another. From the minute I saw Jim Clark against Graham Hill in identical cars when I was a kid, and I knew how good Graham Hill was. He went on to win 2 world championships, the Indy 500s, Le Mans, everything else, Monaco 5 times. How could Jim Clark look so different from Graham Hill in a Lotus 49? And the answer is that Jimmy was doing exactly what Kimi Antonelli and Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc do. which is that he was rotating the car differently every lap, different place based on feel, but he was getting the car much straighter. And Graham would come in a little bit too quick, a little bit of opposite lock, get the power on, beautiful drift. And Jimmy would be slightly different, not as much drift. The car would appear to be moving as one at a time when you could slide the tires without any downside. And he'd be pulling away from Graham. And I was fascinated by that. And then I got to know Carlos Reutemann very well, and he talked a lot about that and explained a lot of it to me. And to me, Carlos was still one of the fastest single lap drivers I've ever seen in Formula One. And then there was Nigel, who basically drives very like Max, very like Kimi Antonelli. And we talked a lot about everything then, the way Carlos drove, the way Jim Clark drove. And of course, from Nigel's point of view, it was like, yeah. I just want to do my thing. This is boring sort of thing, as most young athletes are when you start talking to them. Golfers are the same. Get out there and do your own thing. What he did, he got out there and did his own thing. And his own thing, guess what, was exactly what I've just described on the drawings. That's exactly what Nigel was, compared with, say, Nelson Piquet and Keke Rosberg. Not Alan Prost. Alan Prost is very near Nigel, but left slightly more margin everywhere. Alan drove that red lap, but left more margin. Here's a drawing. If you haven't been able to see perfectly what I was doing, that's basically a rendition of what I've just drawn. You see the red there, which is, in this case, Kimi Antonelli. Yeah, same as before. And the blue is, or the black is, the wider classic line. And you can see there the difference going in. And that was very evident on TV, and less evident coming out because the TV camera wasn't just sort of low down and head on. But that's what it would have looked like. And here's, I put some annotations on. These are out on the community page at the moment. Hopefully some of you have been able to print those out and have them with you when we're looking at this. But I've shown there where a driver like Kimi or Max has an advantage today against probably 85% of the drivers on the field, where their advantages are. It's obviously extending the straight, and you can see how much less load they've got going through the car before they get to that rotation point. In the middle, that's where a Carlos Sainz or a Colapinto would have an advantage over a Kimi or a Max. He'd have a higher minimum speed there for sure. But then coming out, as I say, that's where, again, a Kimi or a Max or a Charles would have his advantage on that exit section too. So I hope that was of interest. That's, that in a nutshell. Obviously, there are so many variables, and there are so many variables based on the number of different corners there are as well. And that's another point, of course, and track surfaces and everything else. And some corners, like turn 1 in Shanghai, kind of lend themselves to that sort of driving. Even a Colapinto will go in quite early into turn 1 in China, because what else are you going to do? It's an increasing radius, corner like that. But equally, 14 in Hungary is a good example. And there will be, we'll talk about the corner. I usually do talk about the corners that highlight this sort of style difference at before every race or during the race. So there we go. Anyway, let's that's what I wanted to say about that. Let's get on to some questions now, which I think we've got. Hi, Peter. Hope you're doing great. That's from Gandalf the Fool. Thank you very much. I am, mate. Yeah, very well. And I hope you enjoyed that little dissertation on, on what this is all about. But thanks for your message. Gandalf, again, asking another question. Do you by any chance know Chris Dyer? It would be lovely to see what insight he has after engineering Michael and Kimi at Ferrari. Well, I knew Chris quite well when he was at Ferrari, and because he's an Aussie and good bloke. I think he's back in Australia now, probably working in Aussie V8s like most of them. But I've got no hope that I would be able to talk to him along the lines that you suggest, purely because I just don't see Ferrari allowing it. I mean, just to give you an example, not so long ago, I contacted Rory Byrne about an article I wanted to write, and been commissioned to write actually, about Tolman. I wanted him to talk about, some of the his early Tolman designs. And He said, "Oh, I'd love to, no problem at all. Just check it with Ferrari, make sure they're okay with it." Yeah. I knew that was a kiss of death. So of course I did contact Ferrari, and they said, absolutely not. Under no circumstances can you talk to Rory Byrne about anything, let alone Tolman. So it wasn't me. It was just like, we do not allow our people to talk about other cars, or our cars for that matter. So as much as I'd love to do that, I can't see it ever happening, to be honest. Maybe somebody else will have some more luck. I'm not sure he's even under Ferrari contract now, so maybe I should give it another go. Chris Dyer would almost certainly have some sort of thing in his contract about not talking about those days without Ferrari's permission, I think. Sarosh, hi Sarosh, thanks very much for joining us. Peter, how do you understand from the onboards the subtle difference between the shadow boxing and adjustments that the drivers are doing to the steering wheel? Well, the shadow boxing is a constant thing. As they're approaching a corner, it's just like that, and that is not a correction. A correction is, you've got your steering input and you're there, and then the car does something and you correct it. But when you're doing this and you're just making tiny movements on the steering wheel, it's just putting tiny inputs through everything, which isn't serving any purpose. And it's all to do with, oh, I'm ready now. I'm ready for the car to throw me in the guardrail. That's what it is. It's a very easy thing to start doing. It's like the yips in putting in golf. It's a very easy thing to start. And I noticed it, as I said, with Leo Fornaroli, and he never used to do that in Formula 2. And I'm staggered that McLaren have allowed that to happen, actually. I think it's probably a function of just not driving the car enough. As I always say, it's nothing like enough. For a guy that's done nothing but driven racing cars all his life, Formula 3, Formula 2, and everything else before that, bang, he comes into a year now as a McLaren driver, third driver, whatever he is, and he drives a racing car sort of 4 or 5 times a year. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous system that we have now. And it just brings me back to my old thing of, I say old because I've been banging on about it for months and months and years, and that is that we should have a second tier of Formula One to do with last year's cars. It should have its own championship, its own TV rights, everything, and should be owned by Formula One, no doubt about that, but it should be a separate thing. And go to all the circuits that want to be on, all the countries that want to be on the Formula One calendar, but haven't yet got all the money and the gravitas to do it, and to get Formula One lit up there. And, why don't they do that? Guys like Fornaroli should be racing in a B division Formula One, and should be in last year's McLaren against, I don't know, whoever, Dino in last year's Ferrari and so forth, and Vesti and these guys, but they just don't do it because they're so focused on their own thing and making as much money as possible from the current Formula One that it would just, breaks their heart to think that way. So guys like Fornaroli, as I say, and it was the same with Kimi, same with Oscar Piastri. When you look at Oscar now, he's definitely not as good as he was when he was on the cusp of greatness, having won F2, F3 into McLaren, ready to go in Formula One. And it's all, and now he's struggling against Lando. And maybe it's something to do with that year of, not doing much. And I just think this year of not doing much is absolutely ridiculous. At that age, when they're all young and hungry, they need to be racing. Anyway, banged on about that one. Alessandro Durango, what do you think about the Malaysian circuit? Considering the new regulations, will it be a track where the driver can make a bit of difference? Well, I don't know about the new regulations. I hope so. I would imagine not, because there are probably long straights there, and then you'd probably have to spend a lot of time regenerating and all that stuff and harvesting. So probably it'd be a mess, and they won't get anything like what they should out of Sepang, because it's a wonderful circuit. I love it. Great racetrack. When you had proper power units behind the driver. And I'm so pleased that it's on the calendar again, albeit as the Bahrain Grand Prix, which, as I said before, to me, it's a double whammy from the Malaysian point of view, because they don't have to pay for anything. And there they are, they got their race again. So they'll get all the benefits from having a race in your country for the local industry, the hotel industry, catering, and everything else, prestige. But at the same time, they don't have to incur a loss. And don't forget, probably all the races, in terms of races in their own right, lose money. There's no, Silverstone maybe makes a bit of money. Monaco, Monza, I doubt. probably only Silverstone and Monaco, because they're so, the deals they have with F1 and they've been around so long, probably make money. But I can't imagine any other race makes money. It's all underwritten by local governments and or federal governments. And in the case of Malaysia, for sure that race lost money. It was the reason it was fell out of the calendar, because obviously very few spectators there, too hot, and in Malaysia, I guess Formula One's big, but it's not that big. And that was the only money that you make anyway as a promoter, is the money on the gate in the grandstands. So yeah, even with these packed grandstands, these 350, 400,000 spectators they have over a 3-day weekend, I doubt very much whether that's anything like enough for any Grand Prix promoter to make a profit on the weekend, because all the real money, the television rights money, the circuit signage, the hospitality and the paddock club, everything else, all of that goes to Formula One. That's the business model that these countries accept. And that's why more and more we're seeing countries that can afford to lose money on the Formula One calendar, if you get my gist. And so this, for me, this is a great thing, because Malaysia they're back on the calendar. We got Sepang back, albeit probably looking ridiculous with the new engine regulations. But we don't have to incur the loss of putting the race on. Mega. Sarosh, kind of you to ask, how's Rob doing? He's doing okay. I mean, I haven't actually spoken to him because he's just in this weird twilight zone period of waiting for everything to happen with the operation. But thanks to everybody that raised money, and for that, it is going ahead. And as soon as I got some news, I'll let you know. But he's, most of what I just did at the beginning of the show is all, everything I should also add, apart from Jim Clark, apart from Carlos Reutemann, apart from Nigel Mansell, Rob Wilson, massive influence on the way I think about racing and driving. Stefan Jakimovic, greetings. Many sports like football are not relevant to anything or focus on it, but Formula One is obsessed with road cars. Yeah, you're right. With road relevance, make engines great again. Oh, there's another T-shirt. Okay, make engines great again. I showed. Where did I come across it? I just came across a Ferrari V12 engine yesterday, showing it to my son Jack, saying that's what a real engine looks like. Jack, he said, what are all those funny curved things coming out the side? He's being facetious, of course, but yeah, you're right. Formula One, yeah, road relevance. We've got to talk about our two Wall Streeters though, and their salmon bagels and their, skinny lattes, and whether or not they want Audi and Cadillac and the current engine regulations purely because they want Formula One to be very road relevant, or purely because they think it's going to make them richer as stakeholders or the brokers of stakeholders. I think it's probably the latter. I don't think they think any lower than, well, they probably think, what sauce am I going to have on the bagel? But they don't think, is road relevance important? They just think, what's the bottom dollar line here? That's probably what it is, I think. Herbert Williams, morning race fans, morning Herbert. No sound? Oh, really? It was me. Oh. Don't give me heart attacks like that. When I think I've done half the show and there's been no sound, what do you think my heart's going to do? Anyway, it was me, Peter Ferret. I'm glad that, Mr. Peter Ferret, I'm glad that it's working for you, because everything looks right my end. Famous last words. All right, let's have a look at some more. Zishan Afsar, Peter, do you think James Bowles is on borrowed time at Williams? Surely Science Junior must regret not going to Audi now, and would they be looking to bring in Christian Horner? I don't know. I mean, I was pushing quite hard for an engineer that I know well to get that job. He didn't get it. They gave it to James Bowles, so I kind of signed off at that point and thought, well, good luck. And yeah, Christian Horner isn't going to be able to do anything there any more than than anybody could. It's absolutely nothing against the individuals at all, but quite clearly, it's going in the wrong direction. And yeah, the only way, as I said before, the only way anybody with, like Christian or anybody in the running to be a team principal actually can make a difference is if he brings a strong team of people with him who are undoubtedly very, very good. Now, if Christian Horner rang Doralton tomorrow and said, look, for 3 billion, I can bring a package to you that includes Adrian Newey, Pete Prod, Rob Marshall, all the great guys from Red Bull. We can be up there running with a brand new car for 2027, but I want 3 billion euros. I don't know, maybe Doralton would do it. I mean, that would make a difference if somebody would pay for that. But of course, that isn't going to happen. And so they carry on as they are, thinking that tomorrow is going to be okay. Isn't that how they all think? I don't know. I'm going around in circles a bit because I kind of lost interest at Williams when they didn't listen. So what can I say? F1 engineer says, "Hola, Peter." Hola. That's all I can say back. Thank you very much. Kartik Kaushik. Hi, Peter. Love the live stream. How much of Audi's progress do you think lies in the leadership of Binotto? And sorry, I said to clear this. And do you see Carlos moving to that team soon? Well, I think quite a lot of the progress is due to Binotto because I always rated him when he was at Ferrari, unlike I think every other journalist on the planet who was calling for Ross Brawn to be reinstated at Ferrari. I always thought Binotto was good, and I liked his engineering background. And I think he comes over as a very calm, nice person. I think that's very important in life. If you're a good person, I think it's always a good sign. So I like that. I think he's done a very good job of managing what is undoubtedly quite a difficult Audi board in terms of what they think Formula One should be delivering and what they should be doing in Formula One. And that can't be an easy job at all, I wouldn't imagine. And I think he's done a very good job there so far. And so, yes, I think he is quite a big, significant part of everything we see at Audi. Good luck to him. Do I see Carlos moving to that team soon? Well, when you've said whether or not Audi actually said this is the deal, Carlos, 10-year contract, X amount, we want you to sign tomorrow. And he said, no, I don't want to do that. Williams is a much better team and left the discussion. I don't think the offer was that firm, but I've always said that if he had wanted the Audi drive, he could have got it for sure. He could have pursued it and he could have got it more or less on his terms in terms of the longevity of a contract with Audi and the branding that he would have got out of it. And he rejected that for Williams. So what would Audi think now? They've got, I mean, Nico Hulkenberg is doing an excellent job there. And I think he should take some of the credit as well for how well Audi are doing. So he's not going to go anywhere. Finally in his life, he's got a team that may be on the way up and he can be with that team and grow with that team. And I imagine they seeing Nico now as a pretty good brand ambassador as well at Audi. So that's that as well. And so he's not going to go anywhere for at least 2 years, if not 3, I wouldn't have thought. And then Bortoleto, give me a break. I mean, the guy is fabulous. So why would you get rid of Bortoleto? So it's not as if there's a real option for him anyway at Audi now. I think the boat has sailed, as they say. Diego Marino says, Madrid, just about a month to go before Madrid receives its first Formula One event. Yeah, okay. Everyone's very excited. I used to love Jarama, and I love going to Jarama and Madrid for the Grand Prix there. So I think this will be a very different thing, and I'm glad that I'll be based in the studio here when I watch it. My big fear is that bank corner being just, a TV corner and not a real corner. But apart from that, pretty cool, isn't it? For Spain, here we are in Spain, won the World Cup, 2 Formula One races. What could go wrong? Anyway, my thoughts at this point do go to all those suffering from the fires in Spain. It's been a lot, not in our region, thankfully, but in the country, it's been a lot. And there've been some other political upheavals as well. But for me, I feel very blessed to be living here in Spain. Great country. Right. More questions. Hi, Peter. This is from Sachin Seshadri. Hi, Peter. I race cars at the club level in Singapore, and I read that you drove 2 strokes to their power band curve. Current battery regs require something similar. Drive to battery characteristics. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think if all they had to do was drive within the power curve, I don't think Max Verstappen would be having a problem. To be honest, I think it's much more complicated than that. It's how you regenerate the power, and yeah, not as simple as that. Sadly, I wish it was. IFCFAN. Look at this analysis F1 on another level. Not quite sure what that means. Hopefully it's a positive comment. I don't know. Or does it mean get over and watch Sky? It's much better. I don't know. So have I been watching F2? Any standouts for you? Do you think Solov and Kamara will be on the grid next year? Solov is rumored to be replacing Lawson, Kamara possibly at Haas. Yeah, they're both very good, aren't they? And I imagine Solov will find his way into Formula One pretty quickly, and Red Bull won't do what McLaren do and just have the guy stand around in the garage, and they will get him in a car. And he's looking pretty good. Solov and Arvid Lindblad, not a bad team at all. This guy's obviously extremely good, and he looks to be pretty short cornery as well. Haven't seen quite enough of him to really be emphatic about that, but he looks very good. Kamara, very good too. As I said before, I'm a bit of a Mini fan, only because he's a nice guy, and I've chatted to him a few times, and yeah, I don't think he's going to do it, but I just, I like it when he goes well. And I also like Kushmaini because, he's not the sort of idea of everybody's next Formula One star. And I love the fact that he's out there driving as well as he is and frequently getting poles and stuff. And yeah, he's just a good bloke as well. Great for India. And I hope Formula One use Kush's talent to try to reboot the whole Indian Grand Prix thing and get behind him and find him some money to get a Formula One drive. And then from there, let's do a race in India again. But I've no doubt that if Kush was in a very good Formula One car and with a massive budget behind him from Liberty, from India, whatever, I think he could do very well. So I'd like to see that. I really would. Yeah, so F2 is not bad this year, is it? It's pretty good. I mean, it's interesting that Montoya, Seb Montoya is a very nice guy as well, and doesn't drive quite like his dad. He's a little bit more front endy, from what I can see. Really good, but I mean, what is going on at Prema? I'm shocked. Really, I don't know who's paying for that drive, but I hope it's not Juan Pablo. Max says hit the like button. Does that mean for Jensen? And by the way, just on that, thank you very much indeed, Max, for asking people to do. You'll see the this QR code. I'm going to start doing that because I've been reading that a lot of people these days, there's a trend towards watching videos on TV again, and many more than you would think, actually. And when it's on TV, of course, you can't scroll down to the description and all the other things that you can do if you're watching it on an app or on your laptop. So that is there, so that if you are watching it on TV, just take a screen grab of that, and that opens up the app for you. So that's my theory anyway. Max Flashart, greetings, Peter and chat. Thank you very much again. Make engines great again. That's a good one. Yeah, we'll do that. Definitely do that. We're going quite well with the old sales and the merchandise. I've never had so many merch sales. I don't know whether I need to become a bit more fancy with the designs, or people just like those sort of Catherine Hamnett type statements. I think they kind of work, don't they? You don't want to wear a t-shirt like that forever anyway, so you might as well just go for it with the statement. Evil Nuddy Branch says, thanks for explaining, Peter. Thank you very much. And then CNC Tematic says, I joined late. What did Peter say prompted this explanation? Well, for those that join late, I'm not going to do the whole thing again, but let me have a look. What have I done here now? 1 second. Sorry. Yeah, over to this one. I was describing the way some drivers take turn 14 in Hungary and the way others take turn 14 in Hungary. And I was doing that with drawings, which showed that with the red, this is what basically Kimi Antonelli does and Max Verstappen. They come out of 13. They don't load the car as much as some other drivers because they're thinking already of getting the car as straight as possible for 14, extending this straight here, and then gradually approaching I say gradually in terms of the curve, approaching what I would call a rotation zone, which is about here, where all they're thinking about is just getting the car to the slowest speed in the most subtle way possible to rotate the car to get it nice and straight and have a lovely straight exit here as soon as possible. Whereas other drivers, Franco Colapinto, Carlos Sainz, good examples, would come out of 13 like this, using all the road, and then they'd go way over to the other side again, load up the car, particularly driving on the rear of the car, feeling the rear. They're all great oversteer drivers, feeling the rear, wider turn in, geometric apex is here. They'll kind of aim for that, but it won't be the point. It'll just be around there, maybe a little bit later than the geometrical apex, bearing in mind they think it's very important to get a clean exit. And then they get on the power very soon. They're very quick in this area, mid-corner, but then coming out, they've got a lot more load in the car. They're still making the corner go on longer, and they're coming out here somewhere, and then they've got a bit of a jink on oversteer on the curb there probably as well. So that's what I was talking about. And those, if you want to see a slightly cleaner version of that, there are 2 drawings I've put up in the YouTube community section of our channel, which you obviously can print out and have a look at to go with what I've been saying. And hopefully then that will, explain a little bit more about why a Max or a Kimi drives the way he does. And Kimi recently had said, I turn in quite late and aggressively. And a lot of people, I think, in Formula One, observers, fans, press, have taken that to mean he actually turns in very late to the corner and then gives the steering a big yank in the middle of the turn-in zone. And I'm saying that's not what he meant at all. What he means is he's extending the straight, and then at this point he's turning in quite late, because it's quite late to be doing your rotation, because Carlos Sainz is already sort of doing it over here somewhere. He's doing it quite late, and he's doing it quite aggressively because he wants to rotate the car so he can get it dead straight coming out. That's what he means by that. So that was all. That was everything that I was doing in a nutshell. For those that have joined late, kind of hope that makes sense. Mouse Down says, really enjoy your drawing the cornering methods, Peter. Do you think someone like Max was taught the best approach by Joss, or did his own feel get him to this level? How much is nature versus nurture? It's a very good question, isn't it? Watching Joss, I think Max is completely self-grown and has done all this himself, because Joss was always a quite late driver of the Carlos Sainz mold. He loves oversteer. He's very good at holding a slide, even today in a Skoda Rally 2. And he was a brave, aggressive driver. Whereas Max, from day one in Formula 3, when I first saw him, was always front end and not at all like Joss. Obviously, Joss has had a role in a lot of Max's life and the way he races and drives. And I suppose some of that head down competitive instinct definitely comes from Joss. But overall, Max, I think, is very much his own man. And Joss compliments him really well, doesn't get too involved, and just lets him get on with it. And that's the way I think it should be. And it's not often you see that, actually. I mean, the other extreme of taking that to its extreme level, there's Nirei Fukuzumi in Japan, who's very quick, whose father is a priest, and he loves to watch his son race, but only turns up at races without telling Nirei, and always buys a ticket to the grandstand and watches from the grandstand. I think that's brilliant. More fathers should do that, really. So yeah, I don't know if Joss played around, but anyway, thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Peter Nikolov says, if we assume that a higher cornering speed allows for less electrical energy to be used during acceleration, does that mean that taking a tight line and short cornering become pointless? Well, I think very sadly, I don't say pointless, but I think very sadly, that's the reason that Charles Leclerc, for example, has struggled so much at Ferrari, because he's not got that mid-corner speed where maybe it's really important to be regenerating power, and where he's doing a good job maybe going in like Max and Kimi, harvesting with extending the straight going in, but then he's not harvesting as much power mid corner. And maybe that's a bigger factor than having the car dead straight. It's also stupidly complicated, even today, with obviously the team still not understanding the quickest way to do it. That who am I to say? All I can do is talk about the things that I know are relevant to how to drive a corner quickly. And that to me is still the beauty of the art of Formula One. And it's been massively clouded and aggravated by the whole new engine regulation situation. And of course, you're going to see some young drivers coming into Formula One and going very quickly because they're very good at knowing how to harness and manage the power. But they may not be great racing drivers in the Max Verstappen, Kimi Antonelli sense of the word. So that's the problem we have with these regulations. It's watering it down and making it a lot more difficult to understand. But I still do what I do, and to me, it's still wonderful to watch. Even on corners like 14 with the new regs, you can still see these differences. So you're right to ask the question. Annoying to have to deal with it, of course. Same questioner. On tracks with long straights, was it a mistake to reduce downforce and narrow the tyres? Two factors that would have allowed for higher cornering speeds when taking a tight line. Well, yeah, the problem with that, of course, is that by making the energy requirement 50-50 ice and electric, Formula One then thought, oh man, but the cars are going to be incredibly slow on the straight now because they're going to spend all their time harvesting power. And so they want everything they can, they can want to put everything they can onto the car to make it quick in a straight line. So, you know, I think that's why they've done it. And they're not worried about corners at all. They just want the cars to be super quick in a straight line, use no fuel, and produce lots of different winners with multiple pit stops and lots of overtaking. That's what they want. You know, you note the cynicism in my voice. Right. Peter, we haven't seen that many crashes in recent times. Do you think the current grid has better drivers or the cars easier to keep on track? The crash happy drivers like Grosjean or TP? Well, first of all, I should say, did you watch the Rally of Finland over the weekend? I mean, just one shunt after another. My mate Rupi had a big one in Rally 2, Martin Sess, Elfyn Evans, and of course the big one for Sebastian Ogier. So pleased he's okay. I was a bit bemused actually by Morizo's beating the chest letter that he puts out after every rally now, congratulating Sami Pahari on winning and hope Ollie, now he's finished second. I hope he likes the new livery and this sort of stuff. And wasn't it great how they got Elfyn Evans' car back into the rally and he finished third? No mention at all of Sebastian Ogier. No mention at all of his shunt and being flown to hospital. I mean, he's all right, was all for checkups, but I thought it was a bit strange. Anyway, I'm sure he mentioned it in other moments. Maybe they've been told not to talk about it, but why? Who has control over the president of Toyota and what he says? Weird. Anyway, getting back to your question, haven't seen that many crashes. No. Well, the season's only half over, and I keep pointing out that the speed differentials on the straight are absolutely ridiculous with these new regulations, and we've got to be very careful and ready for quite a big shunt due to speed differentials on the straight. So that's the first thing, and it's always playing with fire in Formula One to say we haven't had many crashes recently because things can always go wrong, and we have speed differentials off the line, and we have speed differentials on the straight, particularly the opening straight of the lap as well, long straight. And we've got a lot of circuits coming up with long straights. So, you know, cross your fingers, obviously. I don't think it's to do with the cars are easier to keep on track. I don't think it's to do with the drivers. I just think it's there's more runoff area, safety's improved, and it's no less dangerous than it was before, in my opinion. I think it's just the way the first half of the year has gone. We've had a lot of guys go off and not hit anything or damage the car very badly, but still a long way to go this year. So let's not get too confident about that. CNC to matting. Is this representing a particular corner? Why do they enter the pick on the rightish side of the track? Yeah, sorry, I didn't explain that that was turn 14 in Hungary, and they're exiting on the right-hand side of the track because they're just coming out of 13. So that's why it's like that. I didn't mention that. Okay. Thanks, Peter. A picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, it's good to know. Thank you. We'll try and do some more of this stuff. Maybe, maybe over the Grand Prix weekends, and I can perhaps explain on some interesting corners if they come up, which are not being too affected by the power dramas. How much is the disadvantage of two cars starting at either end of the grid when it comes to team logistics? You mean on the grid servicing those two cars, or do you mean in strategy? It's not a problem in terms of logistics, because each car has its own team of people, and the people that pose around want to be on TV will probably be with a quicker car, or they maybe want to be seen to be with the back of the grid car because they've got sympathy for that driver. But the real people that matter, the mechanics, obviously, they'll have their own car and they're there, and it's not a problem in terms of logistics like that. And they'll have their different strategies as well in the race. Inevitably, the guy at the back will be on a harder tire than the one at the front. So it's not a real issue, I don't think. I mean, the classic one was Monza 76, when when James Hunt was going too quickly for the Italians, and so they said that all the fuel being used by McLaren was illegal, and both he and Jochen Mass would have penalties and start near the back. And James, I think he started midfield with the penalty he got. Anyway, Jochen Mass went to the back of the grid. And the idea was that Jochen would be doing 50, 60 miles an hour by the time the lights went out, and then hold up everybody so James could just get to the front of the field, which is exactly what happened for about 3 laps before James went off, I think, or had a problem. Something happened. But Jochen did that. And he didn't get a penalty for the jump start either. So you can get away. But these days, sadly, at the back of the grid, you can't get away with very much. Not like the old days, that's for sure. What is your prediction around the Monumental? This is Diego. Anyone having an edge considering the individual? What do you mean by the Monumental? I'm lost. Sorry, mate. Does that mean Madrid, or does that mean the next race? What is the Monumental? I've never heard of that. Sorry. That's correct. I can't talk about technical things either. F1 engineer. Good name. Right. Let's have a look. Hungary. Mike Stray. In Hungary, qualifying as an example, Lawson was faster than Max through 12 and 13, as well as coming out of 13 and into 14. Max is faster through the apex of 14 and exiting 14. Really? How do you know that? Is that what telemetry told you that? No fan has access to the real telemetry. I will say that Liam Lawson is very good through 14. Very good. Because he does drive very wide turn in on the rear, but he does it really well. And he does have his moments there, of course, when that back gets away from him. So Lawson was faster than Max through 12 and 13. 12 is that right-hander. Well, what do you mean by through 12? What does that mean? You mean into 12? Rotation point at 12? Exit at 12? 100 meters after 12? What does that mean? 13, same thing. And coming out of 13. What does coming out mean? Means Lawson's on the power sooner, probably, which would be the case, and into 14. But at what point into 14? There's no way before Max's rotation area that Lawson would have been going quicker. At the rotation zone, for sure, Lawson was quicker. Depends where you start measuring it. And all that stuff that you get from Formula One, they're not taking into account all the differences there. The rotation zone, the apex, Lawson's much wider approach, getting on the power sooner. They're not taking any of that into account. They're just saying, oh, this is a corner here. There's a mark there. Look at this driver. Look at that. You can't compare it. Sorry. So here we go. Lawson also much faster than Max through 1, 2, and 5. Well, that's the case. Sounds like he was quicker over the lap from what you're saying, Mac. I don't know where you're getting your data from. What does that mean through 1? You mean into 1, in the middle of 1, on the exit of 1, and 2? No, I think not. You've got to be very careful about all the stats that are thrown out on the internet, A, and B, also by the way it's measured by Formula One. And just as an example, I use pretty sophisticated telemetry when I'm analyzing the lap and the corner and the throttle and the brake. It's all there. But I would say I only have 80% accuracy compared with the data the Formula One teams have, which is not the data that is going out anywhere. And my data is pretty good. So what data you're looking at there, I've no idea. But, you know, if Lawson was quicker over the lap, why wasn't he quicker? That's the point, isn't it? He wasn't. F1 engineer. Ferrari have a whole computer security department keeping an eye on what, where, when anything is being mentioned and by whom. And if you're an ex-employee or current, you get the book. Well, yeah, there you go. What is the point of all that stuff? What is the point? What are they worried about? They're worried about Rory saying, yeah, well, you know, when I did the second Toleman, it was a very good car. And I always rated Johnny Cicotto. I think he should have done a better job. He should have been given more acclaim. But then we ran Ayrton, and Ayrton was just a breath of fresh air compared with all the other drivers. Are they worried he's going to say something like that? I mean, or Chris Dyer, yeah, you know, Michael was good. Yeah, we had our moments. You know, he never liked Shanghai, but he was, you know, we eventually got it together there. And yeah, we, you know, that race in Hungary, yeah, you know, me and Ross on the pit. Are they going to be worried about that? I mean, what is it that Ferrari are so paranoid about? I just don't get it. Sorry. Right. And there's another good question here. Good point. I think it's trying to get the thing to unfreeze itself. It says, Rotten Biscuit Podcast. Well, I won't be coming to you for tea and biscuits, that's for sure, Rotten. I see these discrepancies in driving style a lot in sim racing, drives of Max or Kimi. They're just a joy to watch. You can watch them too. Max racing different cars in Nürburgring or Long Beach, literally. Yeah, I'm sure you can. It's, you know, it's all line then more than anything else. It's not, you know, it's hand-eye and line, what he would do. And what I'm talking about is the actual putting it all together as one huge management of dynamic weight through one corner. And that's why, as I say, it's not about line. It's about how you're managing the dynamic weight. The reason Max and Kimi and some others and Charles, when he's on it, can do, and to some extent Isaac Hadjar, I've got to say, can do what they do is not because they've thought of that line. It's because of the way they're managing the weights of the car. They can get away with it. Whereas if Carlos Sainz tried to do that, he's never managed those specific weights. He's managed different weights. He likes to feel the car on the rear, whereas Max likes to feel the car on the left front. And it's two different, completely two different DNAs, if you like. And that's it. Fares Karadesh. Hi, Peter. Toto Wolff with Max on holiday, is that right? Do you really think Max will move to Mercedes? Well, I think Max might go to Mercedes if the offer is the right offer. And I don't think, as I said before, I don't think if the offer was out, I don't think he'd be afraid to go, not afraid, but I don't think he'd be reluctant to go because of Kimi now in the other car. Whereas I think 3 years ago, 4 years ago, he probably wouldn't have wanted to have gone alongside George or Lewis. But I think with Kimi, he would actually see it at this stage of his career. He's a different driver. I think he would see it as a challenge and a good motivation to move forward in the next part of his career. So I think he would do that. Obviously, the money would have to be right. But I don't think that it would be in any way affected on whether they had a holiday together at all. Indeed, if he's not going to Mercedes, there's probably more reason he would go on holiday because, you know, there's no pressure then, is there? So yeah, well, they're on holiday together. They were seen in the motorhome. They had a drink together. Yeah, and if he's going to go there, the deal's not going to be done over holiday. It's going to be done, you know, in a boardroom. Not that Max will go to a boardroom, you know what I mean. It's going to be done at that level. Zavish, a non-driving style related question, but how impactful was Jim Clark's win at Indy in '65? I heard that Americans were mocking the smaller rear engine cars when he won. Oh, it was massive impact, massive impact. Of course, Jim Clark and Lotus did not create the rear engine revolution at Indianapolis. It was started by Jack Brabham and Cooper. And then Lotus, then actually Dan Gurney pushed Lotus into having a go. And they took their Formula One car from the '62 US Grand Prix at Watkins Glen to Indianapolis and it was pretty cold then. It was the winter, just to see how the Formula One car went around Indy. And Jimmy drove the car and thought, yeah, this would be quite good. We should do this, Colin. So Colin went away and put a 4.5 litre Ford V8 in the back of the Lotus 25. Bob's your uncle. That was 1963 Indy 500, where Jimmy almost won. Almost. If it hadn't been for the oil coming out of Parnelli Jones's car and Jimmy backing away, having been told in the driver's briefing that there would be oil flags the minute there was any oil coming out the back, and then discovering that the oil flags were not going to be put out, too late to win the race and finish second. And then 64, he had the suspension failure, the Dunlops and the wheels. But then 65, yeah, he won it. And so that was the first rear engine win at Indianapolis in the history of the sport. And it was, this mild-mannered Scot from Dun, Scotland, Jim Clark, with the Ray-Ban glasses, and just complete antithesis of most of the American drivers, who were all, bandana wearing, cigar smoking guys. And Jimmy was there with his suit and tie at most of the functions, and wore a very nice, discreet polo shirt when he was out of the car, and just generally everything that you'd expect of a very retiring, wonderful Scottish racing driver. And the Americans just loved him as a result, and he became a folk hero, as did Colin Chapman, who looked the nearest thing to David Niven that you could find, and played to the part as well. And the Lotus looked fabulous. It was tiny compared with the big front engine roadsters. It was absolutely tiny. And Jimmy sat low to the ground, obviously. But they had a big advantage in 65 with the fuel. They only stopped once. They had the Wood Brothers team to do the fuel stop anyway. And so it was just like a walk in the park, really. Second part of the race. And then within 3 or 4 days, he was back driving a Lotus 23 at Crystal Palace. Mega. Oh, he did Mosport straight afterwards, I think, didn't he? He went to Mosport, sports cars, and then Crystal Palace. Ronnie says, your explanation on short corners with your drawings is so much clearer to us lay observers on rotations, longer straights and less road. Great analysis. TV is not giving viewers anything like it. Thank you very much, Ronnie. It makes it all worthwhile. Even if, just to have that one message from you makes it all worthwhile. And it's nice to know. I could do a better job, I think, as I go along with this and do more. But I'm quite pleased that my old Logitech webcam did its job. And it's not as high def as, the current one, but not bad, is it? Did the job. We'll do some more. And actually on that subject, I have been doing for members only. I've been opening my folder, my desk folder, my beloved Ferrari desk folder, in which I keep a lot of my favorite documents and photographs, and talking about them as I open it. And I've been using this camera a little bit for that. So if you haven't joined as a member and you'd like to see those, we've done 2 episodes now. A third is going to be coming out in a couple of days, and then we'll probably do 4 or 5, I think 4 or 5 or 6 during this August break. You can always press the join button and become a member. That's what I'm really getting around to saying. It'd be wonderful to have more members we have, the better for the channel and the better job I can do for you. Mike Stragan, not sure where Peter is getting his data, but in Hungary qualifying, Sainz's speed at the apex of 14 was around 120, whereas Max and Kimi were both 135. Yeah, but what do you call the apex? That's what I keep saying. I think you're confusing the geometric apex, which is probably what Formula One use, with a rotation zone. It's massively different things, as I've said many times now. So not sure where you're getting your data from. If you're getting it from Formula One, forget it. Okay. Max says sound and video is fine. What's all this? It's like Teo Pourchaire. That looks interesting. Big Teo Pourchaire fan. Great guy. Should be in Formula One. Hi, Peter. Just saw Teo Pourchaire confirmed for Opel in Formula E. I thought it was a shame he didn't get an F1 opportunity. Oh, that's boring, isn't it? Yeah, no, I thought he was really good. A Carlos Sainz type driver, but definitely talented and quite capable of winning Formula One races in the right team, and never really given an opportunity. another F2 champion, not to be taken seriously by Formula One, and shame on them, I think, and shame on them that he's going to Formula E. I mean, I'm sure he's pleased, and congratulations to him, but what a waste. Will Hildebrand, Peter, I live to learn the inner workings of all sports, but this year's formula has baffled me, and you've taught me I'm not alone in this thought. Thanks for all you share. Well, to be honest, I'm still baffled, Will, but hopefully, hopefully there's a little bit there. I mean, I learn a lot from Mark Slade every time we talk. He does look at life through the lens of an engineer, which is great, and we get that perspective. I look at it more through the light of how they drive, and it's complicated by how they're harnessing the power these days and how they're harvesting the power. And it's all difficult, and we're learning as we go along about the same rate as the teams, I think. I don't think they have much clue either at the moment what's going on. So Matteo Encamino. Hi, Peter. Energy harvesting from the front axle might redress the current imbalance. Some have suggested it will blunt the advantage that people like Max, Kimi have in corners. What do you think? No, I think it would be a huge step forward for proper racing drivers, because then they can start using the rear axle as they want going into a corner. But at the moment, that's what's holding back guys like Charles and Max. And not Kimi, obviously, because of the Mercedes, but certainly Max's inability to be able to brake the rear on the rear and have the balance that he wants is really cramping his style. And he's got a completely different brake balance now to anything he would have used at any stage in his career. That's why he's so miserable about it all. You just can't do anything with the front end of the car. And I think if they go back to front, they'll never do that now, as far as I understand. They'll never go back to energy harvesting from the front axle, but it would be a good thing to do. Yeah, Fornaroli needs to get a seat. TV 11, absolutely. Well, he's got a seat. He's at McLaren, but McLaren aren't doing much with him, are they? Why aren't they running him in, something? IndyCar, or I don't know, whatever. Japanese Super Formula. Keep him racing. Pay for that. Do it. He's a talent, and he needs to be, to me, it just looked like a guy that hadn't driven a car for a while. And it was sad to see. I'm not sad, because it's a tiny glitch and he'll get over that very easily the minute he does more miles, but it's just wrong to see that. All of the energy of these cars comes entirely from fuel petrol. Take away the petrol and then have exactly zero energy and thus zero power. What's that mean? Quite sure what that means. 50% comes from electricity, surely. Am I missing something? Peter, can you talk more about Oscar's driving? I'm a big fan, and I feel like he's a bit lost. What changes were made to his car where he and Lando performance switched last season? Well, I don't think. I mean, there have been upgrades that Lando's got. Maybe a floor, maybe suspension, maybe this, maybe that. But the bottom line is that none of those upgrades have been significant enough to account for the falling away of Oscar Piastri. And I say that because quite clearly the pace is in the car. And I think a lot of it is the minute he had that issue in Singapore with Lando, in his mind, barging his way through, and Oscar having to give him room at the first corner or second corner, and the team not doing anything about that, given Oscar's success that year and his points position at that point, he expected the team to say to Lando, give the position back. Nothing to do with the FIA, nothing to do with the stewards. He expected the team to do that, and the team didn't. And he then went into that mode that we saw for the first time with Oscar, which was, don't talk to me. If that's it, I'm stuffed, and it was just like, and I was very surprised by that. And that continued for a long time. It may not have continued in terms of his approach to life and the way he felt, but it definitely had an internal effect within the team and going forward. And it was that. And if you coupled that with Oscar to me was not far away from what I always raved about him. Not far away at all from what Kimi and Max do through here. Absolutely right on it. And then Lando started doing wider approaches and just neater and tidier, a bit more consistent probably, and going quickly as he would because he's got this lovely soft touch. And I think Oscar started to look too much at what Lando was doing with the car. And the soft touch doesn't necessarily show up on telemetry. And I think he got misled into looking too much at where Lando was braking, where he was putting the throttle on, and it wasn't working for him. And instead of then going back and just doing his own thing and driving the way he drives, which I thought he'd do over the winter, he came out basically still the same Oscar, which is where we find him today. You know, there are moments when the car is good or things go his way, when he's right up there and looks good. But generally speaking, he's struggling to be quite as quick as Lando. And if he is as quick, he's using more tires to do it, which to my mind adds up to more spiky inputs and using the tires more on entry. I think exit is pretty good, but entry, a little bit like the difference between George and Kimi. I think he's, you know, that's where he's suffering with Lando. And Lando's still not in Kimi Max territory, but he's very soft at what he does, very supple. Whereas Oscar is asking more of the car and wants the front end to give him that grip. So I think that's where we're at. And I don't think it's anything to do with changes. A lot of drivers, engineers, people talk about that. It's a bit like, you know, there are so many things you can always blame in a Formula One car if you're not quick, from the tires to the engine to the aero setup to the weight to the track to this to that, and different diff, different this. But quite often it's not as complicated as that. It's very simple. It is the way one guy is driving the race car. And I say that having watched Formula One for, 50 odd years. Mike Stray again. Also in turn 14, Matt goes through turn in fourth gear while guys like Kimi and Liam go through in third gear. Yeah, well, that's a good point you make there, Mike. And I've kind of almost given up on looking at gears now because they're so all over the place and they're so related these days, it seems, to the best gear for harvesting the power as distinct from the best gear for the car being relaxed and getting the rotation the way you want it, that it's kind of, what is the point? And when you have George and Kimi using different gears as they did at Silverstone on a straight, or you have, Max wanting to use second and the team wanting to use first in Austria, turn 3, whatever it is, the right-hander, tight right-hander, and a bit of an argy-bargy about that. It's like, but it doesn't surprise me. You make a good point. It doesn't surprise me that Max wants fourth there because he's always wanted a longer gear. If it's sort of 50-50, whether it's third or fourth, Max will always go for the longer gear, as would a Jackie Stewart, as would a Jim Clark, as would a Michael Schumacher, as would a Niki Lauda, as would an Alan Prost, as would an Ayrton Senna, because you always want the car to be a little bit more settled. You don't want it right on the edge, as would a Nigel Mansell too. You don't want it right on the edge of revs and having to take the next gear. You want everything to be settled and calm. That's my experience of working with great drivers. They always want that. And it doesn't surprise me that. But again, take into account the gear ratio situation in Formula One. Every team is different. And look at Mercedes, where you've got McLaren taking 8th gear before turn 4 in Hungary, and the factory team keeping it in 7th. Same power unit, obviously different ratios. But that's why I say I'm kind of red arrows here with gears now, because I'm not quite sure how significant it is anymore. The QR link works. That's good to know. Thank you. I try to test it, but then I'm not sure what it actually looks like and how small it is and whether it actually goes there. But yeah, that's a good thing, I think, hopefully. Jim Dillinger. Solov has a great ability to come through the field like Bortoletto had and has. Yeah, I agree with that. He looks to be the business Solov, doesn't he? Very good. Iron Mike. I've been watching Formula One since early 90s, and as far as I can remember, Schumi didn't complain in public. Is Mac's criticism of RBS will reach a point where the team will think that they should be offloaded? Let me think about that. I mean, think about it though, because Michael never complained about the team in public. I mean, there weren't many years when he didn't have a great racing car, and if there were things to complain about, it was usually a strategy call or tires didn't get the tires right or something like that. It wasn't, he went from a very good Benetton, he went from a good Jordan to a good Benetton to a good Ferrari, a Ross Brawn Ferrari. Back end of his Ferrari career, not brilliant, but yeah, he didn't complain much. But it was like Bridgestone couldn't really build the tires at that point. That thing that had to last the full distance, wasn't it? Something like that. And then he went to Mercedes, and it was his choice to go there alongside young punk Nico Rosberg. So there wasn't much point complaining about it then, because he was coming out of retirement, and Rosberg was doing well with the car. So why? And anyway, it was quite a good car, so there was no reason for him to complain about it. Max is a completely different situation, because Red Bull have had a great car for many years, and now they don't have a great car. So and it's all tied up to the new regulations. And I think he's to be applauded for being one of the few drivers with the guts to stand up and say, these regulations are rubbish, which is basically what he's saying. And he's right. And it's not because Red Bull don't have a great car. It's because they've taken over. The engine management thing has taken over a lot of the skills involved in driving. So I think there's no comparison there, really. I don't think. I mean, I don't remember a time when Michael was in a car that was, lucky to get effectively into Q3 and were struggling on a long-term basis with a bad car. I think Michael would have complained about it, to be honest, what I'm really getting around to saying, in his own way, but he certainly wasn't afraid to express his mind, Michael Schumacher. Poof. Baz Swab. Peter, talking about the driver silly season and Max's future, in your opinion, which team would benefit most from signing Max, looking at all the automotive series he wants to compete in besides Formula One? Well, for start, Formula One teams in general, Zach Brown excluded, I guess, don't really think about anything outside Formula One. They're not really interested in it, and it doesn't mean anything to them. So, but that's real Formula One teams. If you're Audi, I suppose, and you're doing something else, or if you're Cadillac and you're trying to win Le Mans as well or something, I don't know. I suppose they would think, but if you're going to sign Max Verstappen, you'd be crazy to be signing him as somebody that you thought you could win Le Mans with or win the Indy 500 with or the Dakar. You'd be signing him because you want him as a Formula One driver to win Grand Prix for you. And that's the bottom line with Max Verstappen. All the other stuff is just fun, isn't it? If he's going to do it at all. So, and I think Max is very pleased to have had the opportunity to do the GT racing that he has done, purely because his Formula One season is such a mess. But if his Formula One season was going really well, he probably wouldn't have spent as much time on it, probably. And it's good that he's got it there as a diversion. Very good. Keeps him sane. So which teams are likely to sign him? I think every team would want to have Max Verstappen in their car. Why not? Every team on the grid would want to have him, except Red Bull B team probably wouldn't be allowed to have him, but everybody else would want him. Here's the community link. Oh, okay. Peter Windsor community. Thank you very much. Yeah, go to that, because that's where I do all my social media these days. I've given up on X and don't do anything else. Don't even understand how to use TikTok or any of that stuff. So YouTube is the thing, and that's where I do my stuff. And if you'd like to, keep up there with all the stuff I put out, pictures and everything, little comments, love to have you go to the YouTube. Thanks very much for doing that, Max. Excellent. What is it? YouTube.com @Peter Windsor community. Very simple, isn't it? Good. Thank you. I'll do a thing for that as well. QR code for that. Love your perspectives, by the way, says Bazwab. Thank you very much. TV11 VT11. Is that the reason why Max sometimes looks so completely wrong in some corners? For example, Austin turn 11. It always looks like Max is the only one who always misses the apex. You're talking about the hairpin there. Yeah, well, he often does that anyway. That's not, but it's a little bit extending the straight and it's rotating the car, but it's more Why is everybody using a geometric apex there? There's a lots of grip here where I want it. And where Max is on a hairpin is usually where the grip is. Hairpins for him are slow speed corners where you can only lose ground. You can't really make the ground there. So long as you're going in a straight line, coming out in a straight line, he just wants to rotate the car where the maximum grip is. And guess what that effectively is? That's driving in the wet. That's how you drive in the wet. That's how he drives in the wet. Constant radius around corners, extending the straights in and out as much as possible. But to do that constant radius business, he has to know exactly where the grip is on the track surface. And then it might be right on the edge of the white line on the extremity of the circuit, might be in the middle of the track, might be right on the inside, might be anywhere. You have to feel it. But then when he's found it, that's what he does. And he drives hairpins as he would drive in the wet. It's just like, it's a really boring corner that's I've just got to rotate this as efficiently as possible. So it's not a question of coming down to a geometric apex and making the corner as smooth as possible and straightening it out. That's one approach, straightening out the corner. He wants to extend the straights and shorten the corner. Different thing. So yeah, that's a good analogy, actually, I think. And that's why, if you want to see how Max drives in the wet, just have a look at how he drives through hairpins. He does that Suzuka, he does that in Austin, and he does it in Hungary. Turn 2. Okay, so Mike Stray, basically Liam Lawson was on the pole and won the Hungarian Grand Prix. I think we got that sorted. Very good. Excellent. Congratulations, Liam. And as I say, he is a quick oversteery wide entry driver with high minimum speeds. And as a result, he's probably pretty good at harnessing the power and harnessing and just basically deploying the power. He's probably very good on that, a bit like, all those drivers are. But he's not as quick as Max Verstappen. I'm sorry, whatever you say. Dimitri Karakatsanis. Did Joss, understanding he did not had what it takes to become a Formula One champion, look at his buddy Schumacher and study how he did it and pass that on his child and not what he'd learned himself? No, I don't think it was any of that. I don't ever remember Joss. I mean, I may be wrong here, but I don't think there was ever a moment in Joss's Formula One career when he didn't think he had the talent to be world champion. All he lacked was the right car and the right team and the right place and the right this and the right that, like everybody else. And of course, he thought Michael was quick, but he didn't. I don't think he passed anything on about Michael any more than he changed the way he drove because Michael was in the other car. Any more than George Russell really knows how Kimi Antonelli drives. He doesn't. That's why he's not doing it, because he doesn't actually understand how to do it any more than Kimi could drive like George now. And so I don't think that's the case. No, I think Joss always believed he could win Grand Prix and maybe a world championship in the right car. And I think that's probably what he instilled into Max at a very young age, that inner belief. Phantom Spock, calling Max and Antonelli great drivers and not even mentioning Lewis is so harsh. Well, it's only on what I'm doing here with this corner, because Lewis isn't driving the way Max and Kimi drive through that corner quite clearly. But I did talk about the way he held that oversteer moment he had. And if you've been watching my channel for the last 8 years, you would know that I think Lewis is indeed one of the greatest drivers of all time. So just to take one isolated section where I'm reviewing a corner and criticize me for not mentioning Lewis as a great driver. I mean, how many great drivers do you want me to mention? So yeah, I hope you get the point there. I take your point, if you take it in isolation, probably looks that way, but of course that's not the case. And don't forget, I've always said that Lewis changed his style in 22 to adapt to the appalling Mercedes bouncing that he had in that car. And he still basically never got away from that. And other factors have crept in. And now it's currently suiting him really well, that style, the way he has to harvest the power. And it's a great thing for Lewis. I'm very pleased for him. But he's not the driver that he was in 21 in terms of the way he creates a corner. That's the point. Don't just assume that Lewis is the same driver now that he was in 21, because he isn't. But he's still a great driver, quite obviously. Jez James, Hi, Peter. Google says bravery is the quality of mind or spirit that enables someone to face danger, fear, or pain. So I would think that Formula One can be dangerous given the cars are taken to the limit. Yeah, it's interesting. Bravery is the quality of mind or spirit that enables someone to face danger, fear, or pain. Yeah. Yeah. But then Sterling Moss would say, well, when I get in a racing car, the last thing I think I'm going to face is danger, fear, or pain. Pain, maybe, because of the footwell area and the poor radiator ducting on the Cooper. But Sterling would be the first to say, danger and fear. Why would I, if I do that, why would I want to be a racing driver? I'm not there. I'm there to drive well and be a craftsman around corners, an artist and a racing driver to win the race. So that's, yeah, you're right. But my point is any driver that feels that danger and fear are something that he needs to overcome shouldn't really be getting in a racing car. That's why James Hunt retired, because he was feeling the danger and the fear too much. It wasn't that he wasn't brave. It's just that that was so obvious to him that he felt it was time to stop. Chris Amon the same. But those drivers, when they were racing, didn't think about the danger or the fear. That's exactly the point, because they did it so well. It was just like playing football or golf or cricket or swimming or whatever. They just did it so well. It was so natural that that was a much greater inner feeling for them than lesser mortals who would undoubtedly feel fear or danger if they're doing, 330 kilometers an hour, breaking down to 250 in a tight situation. So yeah, I don't dispute that definition. I just say that the definition isn't applicable, if you see what I mean. MotoGP has increased the distance between the riders on the grid. Do you think Formula One will follow suit? Well, it's a logical thing to do given the disparity of power off the line and the speed differentials, but I don't think they will because of the TV view, the TV shot of wanting to see that grid, the shot from the front, the shot from the rear, the flags waving, the whole thing. If you start increasing the gaps, it's going to be much more difficult to make that shot work. TV will rule that, and I think it would be safer and it's more logical, but I don't think it'll happen because TV is more important than anything else. Mouse down would be pure gold if we could have Newey draw the basic aero principles and explain, as Peter did, the cornering. Yeah, well, maybe we can get Scarbs to do the aero principles and we can get Mark Slade to give us some damping input. That'd be fun, wouldn't it? Yeah. So Mike says that's a great idea about a second tier Formula One championship, although we sort of have two tiers anyway with the top four teams and the rest of the teams. Yeah, good point, Mike. Yeah, again, it's something that should be there and it's not good enough. We have Formula One took over Formula Two and Formula Three and basically orchestrates those two championships into being unbelievably difficult championships to get into because of the money involved that you have to take to a team and the lack of television that you can offer a sponsor, the lack of hospitality opportunities you can offer a sponsor, the lack of access to the Formula One paddock you can offer a sponsor. It's very difficult. If you're a young, talented driver that's won at karting, has won at Formula 4 level, and you now want to generate 3 million, 4 million to get you through Formula 3 and Formula 2, how do you go and sell that? If you don't have a deal with a team because you don't look the right way or you don't have the rich daddy or whatever it is, you have no money at all, how do you sell Formula 3 and Formula 2? You don't, you can't. So you go off and do something else. And it's a great shame. That's the first thing that's wrong. The second thing that's wrong is that even if you then do make it to Formula 2 and you win, as Leo won last year, Fornaroli, you then have this problem. If you've won it, you can't do it again. And if you can't do it again, what do you do? Because he's got his Formula One deal now. He didn't have a Formula One deal up until the McLaren thing. And now he's just doing a few Fridays, 4 Fridays or something, probably. I mean, that's not enough. And what's a Friday? It's just an hour and a half of running. And usually a half an hour in the pits anyway, there's something going on. So it's probably only an hour of running. And even then, there's quite a lot of slow laps, looking in your mirrors and keeping out of the way. And you get one set of tires, maybe, if you're lucky. It's not like going to any circuit for 3 days and just testing, as should be the case, or indeed having his own championship in which to race and winning this B Division Formula One championship. And the races for that should take place, as I say, in all the countries that are not currently on the calendar, but would love to be there. Like, you know, you could do. Let's forget about America for a second, because it has more Formula One races probably than it can handle. But certainly, plenty of places in Europe you could have a Grand Prix where there's enough energy. You could put on a race, a B division race. India for sure. Another race in China for sure. Thailand, Vietnam, at least. Probably another one, probably one in New Zealand. Why not? There's a lot of good drivers in New Zealand. Then you move to South Africa. You could probably do at least 2 in the South African continent, certainly 1 in South Africa for sure. Then you move across to South America. Then the sky's the limit, isn't it? You've got Colombia, you've got Chile, you've got Peru, you've got Uruguay, you've got so many countries that would, Venezuela, that would love to put on a Formula One race of some description. And then, you know, but we don't do it. And then there's Western Europe, France, Germany. And it's because, it's all too difficult. It's too complicated. Let's not do it. It's such a shame. And these very quick guys go from driving racing cars basically at least once a week, all their lives, and they get to winning the Formula 2 championship and bang, stop. No more driving in effect. Terrible. Absolutely ridiculous. Right, where are we going now? Prabhak Arakash, like in turn 14 in Hungary, Lewis's turn in was the best in sector 3. No one could match him. Calling Max or Kimi best in turn 14 is utter disgrace. Keep technical stuff away from personal bias. Okay, I'm going to have another go at this because there's obviously a lot of misunderstanding. I knew there would be when you start to do things at this detail. Lewis was very, very good through turn 14 because he was excellent at managing and harvesting the power application, harvesting the power and using the power perfectly coming in and out. He did not drive like Kimi or Max there. He drove on a much wider entry and he drove on the rear of the car, which is precisely why he had that moment and lost the rear the way he did. And he held it beautifully. I know he held it beautifully, went down a gear, all that stuff. But there's no way in the world he's doing what Charles and Max are doing there. Now, you could say he's therefore much better. On the day, absolutely. With these 26 regs, he is better through there. He's better than Charles Leclerc through there. Absolutely, for sure. But that doesn't mean to say that I can't tell you or show you how a Kimi or a Max drives that corner, because it's relevant when you're comparing Kimi with George, all right? Kimi with George, not Kimi with Lewis, Kimi with George. They're in the same racing car. That is an important point. And it's also relevant that Max is doing that, even though quite clearly Lewis is showing the correct way to use the power. Max is still driving the way he drives. That's what is going on. Of course, Lewis was quicker. We all know Lewis was good in sector 3 there. That's not what I'm saying. If you want to look at how Lewis drove that corner, he was a little bit wider than Kimi, but not much. And then he was turning in a little bit earlier to his apex, and he was beautifully getting on the power and balancing it coming out of here. Absolutely superb. But that's not what I'm trying to show today. I'm trying to show the difference between Kimi and Max and Lewis. And you can see it now, I think, hopefully. Utter disgrace. Well, that's your opinion. I hate to, I'm sad that you think that way. And I'm not biased. As I say, if you take the trouble to look through all my videos over the last 10 years, you'll see how pro Lewis I am and have been since 2006. So again, I do take exception when I'm accused of bias. I'm not biased. Right, next one. F1 engineer says, talking to Mousedown, just buy Adrian's book, How to Build a Car. It's a masterclass for the tech-minded. Yeah, it's very good. Mousedown says, thanks for that. Where are we now? Really enjoy your videos, Peter. Thank you, Justin. Very kind. Max, Ferrari are checking. Yeah, well, they're always checking, aren't they? Diego, Madrid, I mean, the new bank corner around the Madrid. How does it represent such a big challenge or not? Well, I don't think it does. As I say, a bank corner is, the reason we have banking is to make the corners flat or easier to drive. You just bank the corner and the corner does the work for you. Just hold the steering and it does the work. So how can it be a test of drivers other than it's quick? It's not. It's spectacular, and it looks brilliant on TV. I'm sure it will look brilliant. But how can that be a test of driving? I don't get it. You know, it's just bank corner. I mean, you and I can drive bank corners really quickly, just flat, easy. I went sideways. There's a good name. Why does everyone around expect Kimi to do an Oscar from last year? I understand Mercedes has a reliability issue, but Kimi's growing. Kimi's growing with each race now. You can see it. He knows the limit of the car. Yeah, and Kimi's growing, as you say, in harmony with the evolution of the car and the understanding that the engineers have of the car. And that will only get better because he's got a very good brain and a very good approach to racing and to driving. And as I say, you know, you compare Kimi with George, that's what you need to be doing. And he's doing a much better job of getting the maximum from the car than George. And it's not to do with setup. It's not to do with anything other than the fact that Kimi's doing a better job behind the wheel and the pedals. And is anybody saying he's going to go off the boil? I'm certainly not. But I still have this gut feeling inside me somewhere that George is going to win the championship. I don't know how or why. Maybe, you know, maybe Kimi will have a spate of issues, but you just get the feeling that the power is with George ultimately because of the time he's been at Mercedes and the energy that's behind him. And I suppose also, I think we're coming up to some circuits where it's going to be more difficult for Kimi to be quicker than George and easier for George to be somewhere near Kimi. I'm thinking more sort of long straights, chicanes, high-speed braking, all the stuff that George does pretty well or very well, and less finessey corners. Doesn't apply to all circuits, of course, but I can't see George being a lot slower than Kimi, for example, around Abu Dhabi, really. So anyway, we'll see. Carlo says, I skipped his question. Sorry about that, mate. Justin, I sometimes worry about the cynical and dark attitude on the internet, especially in comments or chat. Hope the community can stay light and to the point. Yeah, I think so. And you know, I do like to try and address every question, but after a while, you know, if one's taking a reasonable amount of time and energy to do something, just to have people call me biased and all that stuff, it's a bit tiring. So anyway, there you go. Friction circular. Peter, 4 years of your generous, entertaining question answering. Still a big fan. Interested in your objective view of the Hungary Piastri Norris interaction. Norris radio message warning the team if he didn't get what he wanted, breathe a pit stop order. Peter, you missed my earlier question. Thanks. Yeah. I think. Sorry, I'll go back to that team. I think Lando was absolutely justified in that, and it would have made a nonsense of his strategy in his race and the way his tires were at that point. So I think, I mean, I don't see it anything other than on that second set of tires, on the hard tires, Oscar was holding up Lando. And you don't need Lando on the radio to say he's holding me up. You bring Oscar in, as they did, because his tires were going off at that point, and you see Lando going a second lap quicker. End of story. No discussion needed. At that point, Lando's strategy obviously has to be one that is focused 100% on winning the Grand Prix and getting the best from the car and the tires over the remaining laps, which McLaren did really well, I think. So I don't know what all the fuss was about, to be honest. I think, you know, Oscar has no grounds on which to say his car wasn't any good or he was getting not the same treatment as Lando because he was leading the Grand Prix, and he's got no grounds to say that he's not allowed to race Lando because he passed Lando on the opening lap, the second corner, and led the Grand Prix, and McLaren had no issues with that at all. And the only issue really was when they brought Oscar in, should they have had more awareness of the traffic into which he was then going to be placed when he left the pit lane. And as I said in my video at the time, we shouldn't forget that, actually I said it to Cameron afterwards on the Monday, we shouldn't forget that they were going to bring Oscar in a lap earlier than they did, and they didn't because the pit lane was suddenly blocked by Valtteri Bottas going slowly in the Cadillac. So they kept him out for one lap more. So it wasn't as if there was much choice there anyway in when they were going to bring him in. And after that, Oscar, I think, then went into one of his sort of Singapore things of "Don't talk to me now," which I don't think is appropriate, actually. When you've got a guy like Tom Stollard, who's trying to do the best possible job to get the best from his driver in his car, and he's trying to say to Oscar, "You've got to get to the finish on these tires," and Oscar says, "Don't talk to me now, mate." I mean, what's that all about? So I don't think Lando's ever, between now and the end of the year, I don't think he'll ever be guilty of wanting to ask for a strategy that favors him over Oscar. What he will always do, though, is push for a strategy that works well for him. There's a difference between one and the other. And I think that's what we saw in Hungary, personally. How would you solve Red Bull's driver choice headache for next year? Have they got a headache? They've got too many drivers, haven't they? As far as I can see. Let's have a look. Sorry, go back. Max, Hajar, Liam, and Lindblad all going very well. Soloff, very promising. Well, it depends what you want from the B team. I mean, you keep the A team as it is, quite clearly, assuming Max doesn't leave. But what do you want from that B team? Do you want a team that's going to beat, Haas and Williams and Alpine, or do you want a team that's going to do a really good job for Red Bull and groom the next Max Verstappen and Isaac Hadjar? I suspect it's the latter. And if it's the latter, probably sadly, you're going to have to say, well, Liam might have reached the ceiling of where he's going to get to as a Formula One driver, and we need to give the next generation that seat now. And I think that's the way they'll think. I'm not saying that's the way I think, in case anybody wants to get disagreeable about that, but I think that's the way Red Bull will work. And I think they'll want to have Soloff in that car alongside Lindblad. And I think they would think we've done enough for Liam now. We've given him the A drive, back to the B drive. He's going well. If he's good now, somebody else will give him a drive. It's up to Liam now. I think that's basically what Red Bull will be saying to themselves. Friction Circular, relevance of Daddy's major financial contribution some year or years earlier. Well, it was a different thing because I was making the comparison to Formula 3, Formula 2 owned by Formula 1, and Formula 2, Formula 3 when it wasn't owned by Formula 1. And when it wasn't owned by Formula 1, relative to the market, it was relatively affordable if you were good. It wasn't ridiculous, 3 million. It was an affordable number, and it was a logical number based on what you'd spent doing your British Formula 3 series, when you then wanted to do European or something like that. And I speak from experience with Nigel and Formula 3 then. It was still relatively expensive to the point where Nigel had to remortgage his house just to do 5 races. But I went to, in 80, for the 80 season, there you go, I went to Renault and said, look, Alan Prost has just won the European Championship with Renault engines. Wouldn't it be brilliant now to have a Renault engine car in the British Formula 3 Championship? And I've got just the driver for you, Nigel Mansell. He's a brilliant guy, massive future, blah, blah, blah. And unbelievably, Renault said, yes, great idea. So there, like that, I just got a Renault engine deal. You couldn't do that today because you have to run the same engine. You've got to pay the same, ridiculous surcharge on all the spares. And you can't control any of the mechanics of the engine around in terms of the architecture. It all has to be done templated. It all has to be the same. Yeah, right. And that's the problem. You can't go out and do these deals. And that's why I keep banging on about it. Formula 3, Formula 2, I think Formula 3 and Formula 2 should always be on every Grand Prix calendar, as well as a electric car race instead of Formula E. That should be the Formula 1 calendar. Sorry, when I say the calendar, I mean the race card. Every Grand Prix. But we don't have that even. We don't always have F2 with Formula 1. We don't always have F3. Obviously, I'm talking about European races. So, it's all because they wanted to own it all, to make it all worth more money so they could then sell it and float it. That's what it's all about. And now, having owned it, they don't really want to get involved with it too much. That's the problem, isn't it? It's all this stuff of ownership, money. And they're still the best Formula 3 cars are those lovely what they Euro Formula cars, the Dalaras, super great cars, very light, agile. I mean, the current Formula 3 cars, nothing like as good as those. So William VRFT, always love hearing about Jim Clark and reading up on him. Truly one of the one, and what I believe to be anyway the greatest driver ever. Well, yeah, lovely. Always get messages like that, and you know, bless him. Jimmy was. I was so lucky to have met him, seen him drive, seen him out of the car, and to have met him. For Jim to say, "Oh, you're still here? Come and have a coffee." And going up to the coffee lounge at Sydney Airport, sitting down with Jim Clark, 20 minutes. And I didn't know, I mean, I was young, obviously, but I didn't learn that much. But I did learn that I should never give up and keep going, and what I always do what I believe in passionately. And I've always had that belief. That's what Jimmy told me to do. And I'm watching him drive and the way he was as a human being. Yeah, I don't think there's anybody better, to be honest, as a racing driver. And just magic in everything he did. Hugo Peroni says Soloff might be sent to Super Formula with more FP1 testing and similar to prepare for 28. Yeah, he might do, but we're talking Red Bull here, B team. You know, why do that when you can run him in the B team? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But it makes more sense to be getting Fornaroli to do that. Why isn't McLaren doing that with Fornaroli? Eh? Where's the money to do it? That would be the answer. Who's going to pay for that? Yeah, well. Ronnie says Stefano has reported that fans are happy with the new regulations and that manufacturers were not in favor of ditching them. Where did they get this feedback? The ground sentiment is opposite. Well, I think Stefano probably looks at the TV numbers. They're probably going up, I would imagine. You know, there's still lots to watch. Great storylines still. Lewis winning hasn't exactly hurt things. The young story of Kimi Antonelli is great for the next gen, isn't it? You know, there's lots of good stuff. So there's no reason to think that Formula One would go down. And so therefore viewing would go down. So therefore you could immediately extrapolate that and say, the fans love it. And manufacturers not in favor of ditching them. Well, of course they're not, because they signed off on them. So they're not going to all admit that they got it wrong, are they? So it doesn't really mean anything. But Stefano's got a job to do, and he does it very well. And his half-yearly report was always going to be very positive. I just wish in a way that he had done what Bernie did when he was asked for the first time to do a half-yearly report from Mackenzie and that group, when he sold the rights, and he was for the first time actually not owning Formula One, he was just running it. And he said, Donald Mackenzie, you've got to do a half-yearly report for the board, Bernie. You know, we're going to have our half-yearly meeting in the Isle of, where was it? Jersey, that's right, Jersey. And big hotel, we're in the boardroom there, blah, blah, blah. So Bernie said, yeah, okay, no problem. And then the day of the board meeting, said, sorry, terrible, can't come, massive urgent thing, I've got to stay and do in England here. Anyway, I'll send you my report. So they said, okay, right, do a video link or whatever. So I said, yeah, sure. So he sends over the report, and it says, from the desk of Bernie Ecclestone, there is nothing to report. That's doing it right, I think. Ugo should get a chance in Cadillac. I hope he does. But haven't they got, they're putting all their eggs in one basket through Colton Herta, aren't they? I imagine. I really rate Ugo. I think he's fabulous, and I'd love to see him do very well. I'd love to get him Formula 3 straight into Formula 1 Cadillac. That would be good. I think he'd do very well. He's a great guy, and Formula 1 would love having him, I think. So he's a good bloke. Very good guy, Ugo. Quick, super quick, and very, very good. Very, very soft touch as well. AI went sideways again. Do you think Ollie should take the opportunity at Aston over Ferrari? Aston might not be the best, but the massive upgrade they had in Hungary was proof they can get it right and will be competitive. Why would he want to leave Haas? I mean, surely for Ollie, the best thing is to go Haas and then to Ferrari, isn't it? When Lewis decides he's had enough. I think that's a pretty sure bet. Why mess around with Aston Martin, for Pete's sake? Can't, why would he do that? Of course, the Aston will be competitive and it'll be a quick car, but all the stuff that comes with it, why would you want to do that when you've got a nice life at Haas and then, Ferrari? Doesn't make sense to me if he does that. TKC, how can Toto Wolff, I think is what you mean, be the manager for his drivers? How can Briatore be the manager for Fernando, who drives for a different team? Shouldn't he be a driver's manager being out looking for rides? Well, this is an old chestnut, if ever there was one. It goes back to IMG, International Management Group, Mark McCormack, for many, many years, owning basically the entire worlds of golf and tennis, all the tournaments, all the players, the whole thing, and then deciding, well, we need to do Formula One, not realizing that Formula One was a completely different deal and that the power was with the teams, not with the events or indeed the drivers, and that the teams are the bodies that had the money, and that the teams effectively each are their own management group. I tried to explain this to them way back in the 90s and they just didn't get it. Oh, no. We'll use our same principles. Of course, that's why they eventually got out of Formula One, because they tried to manage Michael and it didn't work. Tried to manage DC, didn't work. And so we have it. Each Formula One team is effectively a driver management company because they have the power to be able to say to a driver, you can race our car. That's why you can't relate motorsport to any other form of sport. The problem is that most of the teams don't really care about the next generation of drivers because they're too busy running their race team. And they certainly don't want to spend any money on the next generation of drivers because any money they've got, they want to spend on their race team. And so, but they love the idea of a young driver academy making them money if they find young drivers who, hey, have got both talent and money, rich dads, in other words, which is why you see quite a lot of drivers that you've never really heard of joining an academy at any Formula One team and being there for 2 or 3 years and then disappearing without trace. It's because somebody's bought their position with that Formula One team, and they've gone to the sim and they've done that and they listen to debriefs and they go to the Christmas party with the team and doesn't amount to anything at all. And so that's why you have Flavio doing what he does. And there's no reason, of course, why a properly run driver academy, in my opinion, could at least have 20 drivers and manage them well, very strict instructions with the Rob Wilson system, plus lots of sponsorship, helping them raise money in their own right for their own racing categories, showing them how to do that, using the sponsorship systems of the Formula One team, ensuring there are no clashes of sponsors with the Formula One team, but helping them raise money. All that stuff is a very good thing. And only the Formula One teams are in a position to do that. But they don't do that, of course, as I've said. They certainly don't want to pass on any of the secrets on how to raise money because they don't want anybody else taking their sponsors. But if they did that and it was run properly, there's no reason at all why, if McLaren had, I don't know, 10, 12 drivers under contract, they couldn't sell one driver to another team at a time when they needed him. And you start managing drivers like that. They're in a position to do that. I don't see anything wrong with Briatore managing Alonso. I don't see anything wrong with Toto managing Valtteri Bottas or any of the drivers George Russell, or indeed obviously Kimi. What's the problem with that? If he's given them opportunities that they've never had, would never have had, and ultimately he's not going to want the worst for them, is he? If he wants Max Verstappen in that Mercedes and he's got to get rid of George Russell, he will still do a good job for George Russell, negotiating the right retainer, best possible drive, all that stuff. So, it's a fact of life that the power is with the teams. The teams 90% of the time misuse the power that they have, in my opinion, but occasionally they get it right. And I certainly think as an adjunct to that, there is nothing wrong with the teams managing a whole bunch of drivers. Benjamin says Fornaroli should hop into the McLaren hypercar they're introducing to WEC if he can't get to Formula One. Yeah, but he doesn't want to admit that he can't get to Formula One. I mean, but the guy's won Formula 3, Formula 2. He's now been given a Formula One deal with McLaren. He's only thinking of Formula One. But, what are McLaren thinking? This is a big question. If Piastri goes somewhere else, would they run Fornaroli? If somebody like, say, Berman, good example, was available, or Carlos Sainz available. Would they go for Fornaroli? Probably not. And that's the problem. If you're Fornaroli and they got to the top there, no more money coming at all, and he did it all on a very tight budget anyway. No more money coming. He's got no drive. McLaren are on the phone, finally saying, "Yeah, we'd like to offer you this. We're getting rid of this driver, getting rid of Ugo, doing this, doing that, and we want you to be our main young driver." Or does that mean a race for you? Well, we'll see how it goes. Yeah, but I want a race. Yeah, but take it easy. We'll give you everything you need. You got the sim, you got that. You'll hang out with Lando. You do this. You do some fashion shoots. And this is good. But when I race, and so it will go on. And what else did he have? I suppose is the answer. But the problem is it's all wrong. No more harvesting is another. Yeah, that's a good one, isn't it? That's a good one. We've got to do that. No more harvesting. Make engines great again. Combine harvesting. Friction Circular says, in the context of this thread, re Piastri slump, how do you think a relatively straight, possibly idealistic character handles the harsh reality of economics, limiting his performance versus teammate? Well, I mean, he did appoint Mark Webber as his manager quite early on. And in my opinion, you would do that because you wanted to feed off Mark's character and strength and ability to be able to race alongside Sebastian Vettel at Red Bull and almost win a championship and take the race to them. That's what you want with Mark Webber. That's what you buy with Mark Webber. So why has that not worked? If what you say is true, it's very difficult, the big reality of how you handle all this stuff, this harsh economy. I mean, if ever there was a driver in a tough situation, it was the number 2 driver to Sebastian Vettel at Red Bull. And Mark did a brilliant job as that driver. He wasn't number 2 at all, not bad for the other side of the garage, eh, mate? And so that's what Oscar needs to be doing. He needs to be the Mark Webber of that era now at McLaren. There's no difference. He just needs to be as positive and as strong as Mark was. And I don't understand why that's, we're not seeing that sort of Mark Webber side of Oscar, because he is, as you say, he's a relatively straight, possibly idealistic. I don't know about that. He's just an Australian that's relatively straight, doesn't want any extraneous around him, just wants to get on with the job. And he's not, I don't think it's a good point, because I don't think he's actually seems to be allowing the whole Mark Webber side of it to come through. Because if Mark's not employed for that, what is he employed for? Right. Benjamin, do you think Kimi watches Max's onboards to see what he does and apply it to his driving? We know Kimi loves Max and he's his idol. Probably a little bit. It's a good point. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know how many drivers watch other drivers' onboards. When they get back to their house in Monaco, their flat, and they're just sitting there in the afternoon on the balcony, not much to do. Do they start looking at other drivers' onboards? Can't imagine it. Probably quite boring, I would have thought. But Kimi with Max, maybe. So difficult with onboards to take into account all the other factors of, power, harvesting, grip level, everything else. Red Bull, completely different car to a Mercedes. So quite difficult to compare. Yeah. Friction Circular, separate question. Verstappen, needing more cardio? He's ballooning a bit, don't you think? No, I don't. No, I think he's fine. He's certainly doing the job. He doesn't look particularly shattered or sweaty when he gets out of the car. I think he's under quite a lot of mental strain this year and anguish. And I think that's obviously debilitating, but physically he's fine. He's got a very good trainer, isn't he? He's guy used to be with Carlos Sainz. Very good. So he's super fit. Friction Circular, maybe enjoying the freedom of being within Team Verstappen. Like Montoya, never bothering with physical training. Yeah, Montoya's a bit like Nigel. I mean, they're both very strong guys, big, strong forearms, and just fit enough to do the job that they had to do at the time. I don't think Montoya suffered from not being physically fit enough anywhere at any race, any more than Nigel did. Nigel suffered a lot from all the injuries he'd had over the years. And Montoya maybe suffered a bit after he broke his arm, whatever it was, when he was motocrossing, but I don't think. No, I think Max is fine. I think Max is really, really fit. Looks great. Perfect racing driver in many ways. Right. Where are we? Hello from Texas. The FEZGG. And if you know how to pronounce that, you're a better person than I. So Friction Circular says Max is driving the equivalent of this looks like a good one. Where are we? Max is driving the equivalent of the Cooper T81 and the iRacing predecessor, where Ferrari Mercedes is the Lotus 49. Yeah, so that'll be the 66 Cooper, I guess, the Cooper Maserati V12, which was driven by a number of different guys, obviously privately entered too. Joe Sifford had one, Joe Bonnier, but also factory drivers, Jochen Rindt, John Surtees, Chris Amon. And Jochen hated that car so much that when he felt the engine about to go at Watkins Glen towards the end of the year, he just declutched and put maximum revs on it and just blow it into smithereens. Yeah, not a good car. But if you want to see drivers, doing what they do on the limit, sliding, look at that Cooper Maserati, H16 BRMs as well, what Jackie Stewart and Mike Spence used to do in those cars, and certainly what Jochen and John Surtees did in those Coopers. Just, yeah. I think the Red Bull's better than the Cooper, to be honest, but anyway, everybody has their own opinion. I still think it was quite funny how Max couldn't believe that he finished second in that race in Hungary. He was about to slam the car and slam this. Today, the car was, the car today. He kept remembering he just finished second, so it couldn't have been that bad. Right. Right, where are we? Friction says, oh, he's talking to Dimitri. I've recently listened to the Verstappen book as an audible book. That will answer your question. Very determined man. Okay. All right. I'm going to have to wind it up, guys, because I've been going for a long time. And Dexter needs his lunch. And I need to get on. I've got a big golf tournament tomorrow. So I need to caddy for that and get ready. So anyway, everyone, thanks so much. I know there are a lot of questions I didn't get through. I'll be doing some more live streams. So please keep going. And many thanks for joining me on this one. I know it's been different. And those drawings, maybe, the Lewis Hamilton fans or the Charles Leclerc fans don't like it or whatever, but I'm talking about how those two guys drive through that corner and why it works for them. And obviously it is subject to the 2026 engine regulations, but it is basically what is going on there. And, I hope that made sense to some of you, if nothing else. So yeah, thanks for joining me, and we'll be doing more. Don't forget, for members, we got those opening of the desk folders content as well, which I hope you'll enjoy. And we're back doing more live streams very soon. So watch this space. And don't forget to go to our community section on the YouTube channel as well. So until then, take care. Thanks for watching. Thank you.